talked about, there were two big buckets that were discussed in our group. One was around like economic model reform, so taxation, basic income, through like sustainability too, and then having a business case around the amount of money that is spent on closing gaps, rather leveraging them to be able to bring those resources back into the community. And then the other big bucket was like building people, right? How do we do that in a way that there's dignity for like all people? And then all those pieces in conjunction with like a sustainable model, right? So how do we create some sort of taxation and economic reform where it's sustainable and it's constantly freeing up other resources and bringing it back? I was having this idea of like, if other communities are modeling this, but they're not getting $1 million or any money, right, to do this. So how can communities do whatever it is that we're proposing with zero resources, right, or very little? So there's that perspective of freeing up resources that are currently giving to Band-Aid problems, and then how to actually listen to people and engage people in a way that is respectful, but it's also building everyone, right? So both, when we talk about in the context of Madison, it's both building white people to have greater understanding and listening and making sure that they understand how our liberations are connected, but it's also building people of color to understand, this is not like anybody's table, but we understand that you have trust issues. There's things that already happened before we started this conversation, but how do we move forward from that conversation? So there was a lot of discussion on that. There were poignant examples of like mapping resources and community assessments. I know some neighborhoods have done things like this, but there was another term that was brought up around diversity leverage, right? How do we use that framework to also enhance? And then we kind of finished the conversation with a very easy question about how do we convince people that this is a good idea. So there's definitely going back to that economic impact, but we feel that there are people that we can say all day long how this is going to be better for the entire community, that they're still not going to say like, well, I don't care, or I'm going to be with my soccer ball here for myself. And but how do we do that? So we had this conversation about like who needs convincing, who are those people, and how do we convince them, which we didn't get to solve this.
Great, thank you. And one thing Steve mentioned as he came into the room was that with the South Madison Promise Zone proposal, people outside of Madison see Madison as a very well-to-do, great place to live community, so why would we need this money? Right, so we're going to need to make a case for why, when Madison is nationally viewed as one of the best places in the country to live, we should receive $100 million to make change happen. Report out from this table, please.
Okay, we had a great conversation. It's hard to synthesize it down into, so help anybody jump in. So first we talked about really needing to redefine sort of our sense of what inclusion means, and to somehow create the ability to have sort of a sense of shared destiny, that we are willing to get uncomfortable in uncomfortable places together so that we can get to new social dynamics and structures and shared, honest, mutual relationships. I think that synthesizes kind of that piece. Second, we started talking a little bit about all the different programs that are out there and which ones may or may not be, and some skepticism about just fully funding programs, but which led into that discussion about social impact and how do you break down the misconceptions of what the problems are and who's at blame, and sort of eliminate that and start to build new ideas around and connections between programs and resources, and create potentially new and based on what we're learning about through our relationships and through really looking at who's at the top and who's at the bottom, if you want to look at it that way, and how do you bring that to the middle in a very mutual way so that you are creating human and social capital. We talked about sort of an example of if you were to look at children and childcare as a source, and could you get our community, the corporate, public, private, and community to recognize that healthy, well-adjusted, emotionally strong children are critical and really fully fund birth to 5 or even childcare through 12. How do you could that be create a sustainable model for that through, then we're just getting into talking about policy and sustainability. And I was sharing, I went to a training in Washington about the dedicated funding stream model, which is creating special taxation for children and youth outcomes, which Don talked about a little bit in the beginning. It is changing dynamics in communities across the country. There are several dozen communities that have passed a whole variety of different ways of funding children and youth outcomes that are dedicated in some communities, like in St. Louis, which is a suburban St. Louis, and Missouri the entire state has it. They have absolutely taken some of their worst school districts and made them some of the best with outcomes for children. Florida is another state that is leader in that. Anyway, so how do you create sustainability for those efforts? Through policy, creating tax streams, and also just through public media campaigns and helping people, bringing sort of what we're doing locally into understanding the importance and the sort of almost economic outcomes of the work that is being, by creating healthy children, running a campaign so that people understand the work isn't charity, it's part of well-being and the economic fabric of our quality of life in our community. Anyway, I don't know if there's more to add, and we have some great...
Part of how you create this sense of shared destiny.
Absolutely.
Right? It's like the question that you kind of left off with, Ananda, is how do we create that sense of shared destiny? And it seems like children are probably one of the most powerful ways to go about doing that.
Yeah.